Ah, the Super Nintendo, my personal favourite gaming platform. There are so many classics on this system, it has been hard to narrow down a list to only 50 games. To make this task a bit easier though, I have left out Japan exclusives, as I have already made a video on my top 50 favourite Super Famicom games. Even without Japan only games though, this list was still bloody hard to produce. So, if your favourite is missing from this list, don't cry too much, as in all likelihood it only narrowly missed the cut. So, if you're a Super Nintendo connoisseur like myself, sit back, relax and enjoy this nostalgia trip. Or, if you're new or unexperienced in using this system, prepare for some of the best education of your life. Yeah! Super Mario World was amongst the first games I played on the platform, and what a bloody good start this game gave me. This is easily one of the greatest 2D side-scrolling Mario games of all time, and a game that gave me countless hours of enjoyment exploring the game inside out. You play as Mario on his generic quest to save the princess, this time on a romp through Dinosaur Land. The game features the return of all the Koopa kids and the debut of the ever popular Yoshi. You will spend days with this one looking for all 96 of the game's exits, and this game is always worth a revisit for veteran players once every few years. Speaking of side-scrollers, another one I loved on the platform is Capcom's Aladdin. Many people refer the Mega Drive Aladdin game for its smooth cartoon-like animation, but I personally will always prefer this version. Nice graphics combined with music from the film and a sensible level of difficulty can make for a fun, therapeutic play session. I never get bored of riding flying carpets through caves of lava or somersaulting off guards' heads in Acrobar. This is one of my personal favourite Disney games ever. Final Fantasy III, or Final Fantasy VI if we are counting the games in Japan, this was one of the many great games I had to import from the United States to play. Many people herald this game as the greatest Final Fantasy game of all time, and after playing through it myself, those people have a very good case. From the story, to the music, to the simple yet satisfying battle system, this game is an all-time classic. Also in regards to the story, the villain of this game, Kefka, is by far the most dangerous, threatening villain in Final Fantasy history, so the player has an epic fight ahead of them in their adventures with this one. R-Type 3 is a traditional Japanese space shooter. As good as this game is though, I have a confession to make regarding this one. I have never managed to actually beat this game, as at times it gets disgustingly difficult. It is one of those games though which at the same time is so good you just want to keep trying again and again and again. Fun power-ups, a strong soundtrack and great boss battles definitely make this one to play. Ah, Plock Plock Plock. I love this game so much. This 2D mascot side-scroller by the Pickford brothers is bloody British, just like me. Obviously that isn't the reason to play it though, as I never knew that fact till growing up. This game is in my opinion the most underrated game on the entire system. Plot can fire his limbs in similar manner to that of which Rayman could do a few years later. This quirky game constantly changes up the gameplay and has arguably the best music on the platform. In fact, the music sounds so impressive, when Miyamoto heard it for the first time, he didn't believe it was playing on Super Nintendo hardware. A game which is certainly not one to miss. Mega Man X is essentially Mega Man on steroids. Capcom took all the best elements from the classic Mega Man series on the NES and paired it with new game mechanics and 16-bit graphics and music. Mega Man X is possibly the Blue Bomber's finest ever expedition, and features the debut of many iconic characters such as FZERO, Sigma and Vile. I may have put more time into this classic run and gun game than I did any other game on the SNES platform. This is an essential game for any SNES collection. Earthbound is a cult classic, and amongst the priciest games to own on the Super Nintendo. This JRPG stands apart from others in the period, as it breaks the conventions of castles and other generic fantasy settings, and it trades it all in for a more residential USA sort of look. There are no swords and bow and arrows in this game. Instead, you get baseball bats and frying pans. This Magic Roundabout inspired game is amongst the most unique on the system, and features decent gameplay, a good story and great music. Combine all of this and it easily makes the game worthy of its cult following. Kirby's Ghost Trap, known as Kirby's Avalanche in North America, is a Puyo Puyo game with Kirby branded slapped on the front of it. We saw the same scenario on the Mega Drive with Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine as well. This game is just a classic Puyo Puyo puzzle game, so nothing exuberant here. However, it is the only Puyo Puyo release on the Super Nintendo in the West. If you are not a fan of this fantastic series, then in all likelihood you are dead inside. Earthworm Jim 2 is the second game in the series on the Super Nintendo. This quirky run and gun platformer has an extremely crude 90s sense of humour to it. This zany off-the-wall game is bigger, better and generally all-round more functional than its predecessor. It can be bloody difficult at times, but the weirdness of this game, paired with the extremely varied gameplay, always makes this one worth a play. The first time I saw Donkey Kong Country, the game blew my mind. The game had the most beautiful graphics I'd seen yet, and it felt like the future was here. It isn't just the graphics that make this reimagining of Donkey Kong so fantastic either. The gameplay and the music can stand toe to toe with the graphics as well. This 2D side-scroller also featured the debut of Diddy Kong, a character that is popular to this very day. There is nothing like a bit of jungle hijinks on an adventure in Donkey Kong Country. Super Star Wars is one of a trilogy of games for the Super Nintendo, each of which are based on the original Star Wars trilogy. The first of these, simply titled Super Star Wars, follow the story of A New Hope. All three of these games are good ones, however the first one in the series is probably my favourite. This is a great series of run and gun games, which even feature much of the soundtrack from the Star Wars films. My only gripe with this one is the insane difficulty, and I have still not managed to beat this game to this very day. Speaking of decent difficult games, another toughie is Super Ghouls and Ghosts. This Capcom title from the Ghost and Goblin series is actually exclusive to the Super Nintendo, whereas Ghouls and Ghosts on the Mega Drive is actually a port of the arcade game. Like all the games in this series, it features the usual tropes of great platforming paired with extremely hard gameplay. Using the double jump mechanic is always jolly good fun too. UN Squadron is a Japanese style shooter and is based on the manga series of the same name featuring the same main characters. Here their mission is to stop a terrorist group known as Project 4. The player has an energy bar that is consumed over the course of a single life as the player sustains damage. This is a really fun game and features nice varied aesthetics from most other Japanese style shooters. Super Castlevania 4 is a great entry in Konami's Castlevania series. In this game you take control of one of the members of the Belmont family as you make your way through Dracula's castle. Unlike previous entries in the series, Belmont can whip in all directions, giving the game great controls. The game's music and scenery manages to create a creepy ambience within this game, making this game amongst the most memorable on the entire platform. STARWING, known as Star Fox in North America, is the first game in Nintendo's Star Fox franchise. This on-rail shooter, programmed by Argonaut, features 3D polygon graphics powered by the Super FX chip. This was one of the very first Super Nintendo games I ever played, and the graphics at the time were mind-blowing for a simple 16-bit system. This game is still my personal favourite game in the Star Fox series right up until this day. The game may feature simple graphics by today's standards, but the music and gameplay still make the whole affair extremely atmospheric. The FIREMEN only saw a release outside of Japan in PAL regions, and I am lucky enough to own a complete copy of this game. In my opinion, this obscure game is amongst the most underrated on the platform. The game is essentially a top-down overhead shooter, however instead of using a gun, you wield a hose. The aim of the game is to scour a building, putting out all the fires on your way to the top. You also face off against enemies and bosses, which are essentially sentient fire beasts. This really is a great game, and wherever you live in the world, you should make the effort to hunt down a copy. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past pretty much fits any list of great Super Nintendo games. The Zelda series has now reached iconic proportions, and a large percentage of fans consider this game the best of the bunch. Growing up, this was always one of my favourite games on the platform, and the experience is unlike anything else really. The game is pretty much the blueprint for Zelda titles for many years to come. and this overhead adventure game, chock full of puzzles, is as close to perfection a game can get in my opinion. Turtles in Time is easily the best side-scrolling beat-em-up on the Super Nintendo. The system may offer slim pickings in regards to this particular game genre, however that didn't stop Konami from making this game one of the greats. You get to choose to play as one of 4 Teenage Mutant Hero Turtles as you make your way through level after level of quality beat-em-up action. Overall, this is a great arcade conversion, which features additional stages and gameplay modes. FZERO was one of the first titles released for the Super Nintendo, however that hasn't stopped it from being one of the best games ever released for the platform. This fast-paced racing game has tight controls paired with a great soundtrack to put you in the mood for fast-paced gameplay. I challenge you to listen to the soundtrack of this game in your car without managing to do any speeding. The only thing this game is lacking is a 2-player versus mode, but apart from that this is an extremely solid racing game. Secret of Mana is a Squaresoft action RPG. The game was originally going to be part of the Final Fantasy series, however Square thought it would be silly to name it as a Final Fantasy game as it was action orientated instead of turn-based. So by that logic, someone in the comment section explained to me why it was acceptable to make Final Fantasy 15 action orientated. Why was that game not classified as a mana game as well? Very confusing. I suppose it's a different time period, but still annoying. Anyway, regardless of this rebranding, Secret of Mana is a beautiful game, taking place in the breathtaking environments set to fantastic music. This game is a classic and in many ways can even stand toe-to-toe with Link to the Past. Sadly, I never discovered this one until I was an adult, however I wish I could have played this one in its prime. What isn't to love about Mario All-Stars? 4 of the all-time greatest platformers all on one cartridge, paired with souped-up 16-bit graphics and music. For many Europeans, this would have been many players' first experiences with any of these games, since the NES sold pretty terrible on my continent. All 4 of these games are fantastic, and even individually can all be heralded as benchmarks in gaming history. Mario All-Stars is perhaps the best and most famous compilation cartridge of all time. Mega Man X2 was obviously the second Mega Man X game in the series. The game brought much of the same as its predecessor, however since its prequel is one of the best games on the platform, that isn't something to complain about really. The game is literally just more of the same style action we received previously, however that is a wonderful thing. There were many Super Bomberman games released on the Super Nintendo, however only 3 of those were released in the West. The best of this bunch in my opinion is Super Bomberman 2. The game plays in the same way as all the other Bomberman games from the era, where you play as a terrorist from a top-down perspective, literally blowing up walls and bombing your opponents. The game features a fantastic multiplayer mode, great level maps to play on, and interesting boss battles. Super Street Fighter 2 was the 3rd and final installment of Street Fighter 2 games on the Super Nintendo. Some players prefer Street Fighter 2 Turbo, however I have always been more of a fan of Super Street Fighter 2 due to the deeper character roster. In this iteration of the fighter, you get to choose to play as one of 16 different fighters, including the debut of 4 new characters. Street Fighter 2 to this day is considered one of the finest fighters ever made, and it speaks volumes about the game that an iteration is about to be released on the Nintendo Switch. Zombies, known as Zombies Ate My Neighbours in North America, is a top-down overhead shooter. The game features colourful and detailed graphics, and the game's music can be seen as a homage to the spooky, over-the-top music found in old scary flicks. The player navigates suburban neighbourhoods, shopping malls, pyramids, haunted castles and other areas, destroying a variety of horror movie monsters including vampires, werewolves, huge demonic babies and giant worms. This is a unique, quirky game that over time has built up quite a cult following. Soul Blazer is an action role-playing game for the Super NES developed by Quintet. The player takes the role of the Master's servant to destroy monsters and release the captured soul of a world's inhabitants. The player frees a series of towns by fighting monsters in traditional dungeon crawl battles. Destroying monsters' lairs in the dungeons causes a soul belonging to a former town's occupant to be liberated and reincarnated. This game is the first in the trilogy of action role-playing games developed by Quintet. Donkey Kong Country 2 is obviously the second game in the DKC trilogy on the platform. The game features a pirate theme and the debut of Dixie Kong as a playable character. In this game, Diddy and Dixie go on a quest to save Donkey Kong. Like its predecessor, this is a great game, and many seem to feel that this entry is their favourite one in the series. I, on the other hand, prefer the other two, simply as I found the jump mechanic for the Snake character a bit broken, making certain levels on the game occasionally very frustrating. But on the whole, this is a great game. Super Mario Kart made its debut right here on the Super Nintendo. This racing game featuring Mode 7 graphics was the game that started it all. The player takes control of one of 8 Mario series characters, each with different capabilities. The game features various modes including competing for various cups, time trials and versus modes where 2 players can race against each other or face off in balloon battles. All the Mario Kart tropes are here, from Mario themed stages to firing weapons at your opponents. In Magic Sword, the gameplay consists of side-scrolling fighting with some platforming elements. The player controls only the main character. The accompanying ally is controlled by the computer, who follows the player diligently and only attacks and jumps when the player does. In this game, the player must fight his way through a mystical tower in order to save the world. This is a really fun game and the closest thing in my opinion that Capcom have to a hidden gem on the system. This game would probably be more remembered if it wasn't released at exactly the same time as some other huge name games. Pocky and Rocky is the second Super Nintendo game in the Pocky and Rocky series. This is a top-down overhead shoot-'em-up game developed and published by Natsume. The game features many elements from classic shoot-'em-ups but gives the player free 8-directional movements. Both Pocky and Rocky games have a lot of charm and are quite different from other offerings on the platform. Both of these titles are worth hunting down for a play. Illusion of Time, known as Illusion of Gaia in North America, is the second action RPG in Quintet's fantastic trilogy. The game features great puzzle-solving elements, effect-heavy graphics, an eclectic soundtrack, and a gentle difficulty slope. The game essentially builds on the same style of gameplay present in Soul Blazer, but does everything bigger and better. Although this trilogy of games are all action RPGs, they are all standalone stories in their own rights. Super Punch-Out is a boxing game published by Nintendo for the SNES. This sequel to Punch-Out on the NES has good controls, a deceptive level of challenge, great sprites and animations. The game is exactly what you would expect from a Punch-Out game really, where you control a boxer in third-person perspective who you have throw and block punches strategically as you work out your opponent's attack patterns. This game is another great entry in the Punch-Out series. Castlevania Vampire Kiss, known as Dracula X in North America, is the second Castlevania game on the Super Nintendo. I do not personally think that this game is as good as its predecessor, but it is a strong game nonetheless. The music, for example, is absolutely fantastic, and the art style may be some of the very best on the system, far outweighing that of Super Castlevania 4. This one plays more like an NES Castlevania though, rather than the fourth entry in the series. This would be because it's a port of an older game on the PC engine. Kirby's Fun Pack, known as Kirby Superstar in North America, is a collection of smaller games on one cartridge. If you're a fan of the Kirby series, Kirby's Fun Pack is a game to own. Not only are there quite a few homages to classic releases in the series strung throughout, but there are also enough new gameplay ideas tossed into the mix to please even long-term fans of the series. Like all Kirby games, this is an easy to play game in terms of difficulty, but my god, is it relaxing. Demon Crest is a side-scrolling platform video game developed and published by Capcom. It is the third video game starring Firebrand, who is an enemy character from the Ghosts and Goblins series. The gameplay is a mix of standard platforming with mild RPG elements. The stages are divided into 6 main areas and can be played multiple times. Demon Crest brings depth and artistry to an action RPG genre, making it one of the top SNES titles to own. Super Probotector, known as Contra-Free Alien Wars in North America, is a classic run-and-gun shooter produced by Konami. This game is arguably the best in the whole Probotector series, and it is praised for innovations to the series such as the spinning playfields in certain levels. The game features the polished gameplay of the earlier titles and kicked up the action energy even higher than ever before. Super Mario RPG Legend of the Seven Stars was released exclusively in North America in terms of Western releases. It is a role-playing video game developed by Square and published by Nintendo in somewhat of a Dream Team encounter. The game contains fundamental gameplay similarities and inspirations to other Square role-playing video games such as Final Fantasy, and story and action-based gameplay derived from the Super Mario Bros. Series. This game is well known for its fantastic gameplay, quality graphics, and for its brilliant sense of humour. This is a game not to be missed for fans of the JRPG genre. Mega Man X3 is the third and final X game on the Super Nintendo. This is one of the rarest ever SNES games in the PAL regions, and it is the most I have ever spent on a complete in-box game. Probably the holy grail of my personal collection, to be fair. Anyway, Mega Man X3 brings much of the same as the previous two installments. It's just more X greatness really, which personally I can never get enough of. So personally, I'd say all three deserve places on this list. SUNSETRIDERS is a side-scrolling run-and-gun video game developed and released by Konami. The game is set in the American Old West, where the player takes control of a bounty hunter who is seeking the rewards offered for various criminals. The game plays very well and should prove an interesting challenge for your finely honed arcade skills. This is certainly a very unique run and gun game in terms of look, style and aesthetics. Speaking of games set in the American Old West, there is also Wild Guns. This space western shooting gallery video game developed by Natsume follows the story of Annie and her base hunter Clint, seeking revenge for the death of her family. The player controls either Annie or Clint, sidestepping and jumping in the foreground while shooting down enemy robots in the background and dodging enemy bullets. These gameplay mechanics combine elements from third-person shooters and light gun games. The game features intense action, a fun cooperative multiplayer mode, colourful graphics and the ability to shoot almost any on-screen object. A fantastic entry in the Super Nintendo library. Final Fantasy IV, known as Final Fantasy II in North America, is amongst the most memorable Final Fantasy games of all time. Like Final Fantasy VI, this game too features great JRPG gameplay, story and music. The game's story follows Cecil, a dark knight, as he tries to prevent the sorcerer Golbez from seizing powerful crystals and destroying the world. This game essentially redefined the standards of JRPGs at the time. Street Fighter Alpha 2 was the fourth and final Street Fighter game released on the Super Nintendo. This is an arcade port released late in the system's life, which was also released on the Sony PlayStation and the Sega Saturn. One would think that the Super Nintendo hardware would perhaps not be able to even run such a game, but to Capcom's credit, they managed to pull it off and pull it off very well. The game may run a tad slower than on the more powerful systems, but it is a feat that must be appreciated that it was even possible to run this game on a 16-bit system. So why not try out this technical marvel yourself? The Legend of Mystical Ninja is personally my favourite Konami game on the entire SNES platform. I have no idea why Castlevania 4 appears to get more love than this one. I guess it is because it was featured on AVGN once. This light-hearted adventure was the only Goemon game that made it to the West for the Super Nintendo. This fantastic gem mixes RPG adventure style wandering around with side-on platform action. The game features some wonderful music, beautifully drawn graphics and a supremely addictive challenge. This game, along with its Japanese exclusive sequels, are Konami games to play. Secret of Evermore is the Western sequel to Secret of Mana, whereas Japan got a completely different one, which I talked about in my top 50 Japanese game list. The story of Secret of Evermore follows a boy and his pet dog as they are inadvertently transported to a fantasy world created by an eccentric inventor. The player guides both the boy and his shape-shifting dog through Evermore, a world that is composed of separate realms, each resembling a different period of real-world history. The game is good enough to stand its ground as a top SNES title in its own right, and features wonderful visuals with good use of colour, animations and backgrounds. Yoshi's Island Super Mario World 2 is a side-scrolling prequel to the whole Mario franchise. The game casts players as Yoshi as he escorts baby Mario through 48 levels in order to reunite him with his brother Luigi, who has been kidnapped by baby Bowser's minions. The game features almost perfect controls, graphical variety, and an abundance of hidden items and concealed rooms. Yoshi's Island is a game that shows real heart and creativity, which slightly broke away from the traditional Mario formula to become a franchise in its own right. Lufia 2 Rise of the Sinistrals by Natsume is a role-playing video game with puzzle elements. In Lufia 2, characters walk around an overworld map, enter dungeons, fight monsters, buy or find new equipment and spells, and set out on a quest to save the world. Like many others on the Super Nintendo platform, this is a very strong JRPG indeed. Mega Man 7 for the Super Nintendo is actually part of the original Mega Man series on the NES, rather than the X series, which picks up directly from the events that happened in Mega Man 6. The game, with its colourful presentation, play controls and challenge, is a worthy successor to its NES predecessors. I personally do not think this is quite as good as the X series, but it's worth a play regardless and deserves a place on this list. TERRANIGMA is the third instalment of the Gaia series and completely missed a North American release. This game is easily the strongest of the entire series and features some of the most beautiful visuals on the entire platform. TERRANIGMA tells the story of Earth's resurrection by the hands of a boy named Art and its progress from the evolution of life to present day. The game is chock full of solid gameplay, great music and surprisingly deep story themes. In terms of quality, this game is right up there with Link to the Past. Super Metroid is a direct sequel to Metroid 2, Return of Samus. The player controls bounty hunter Samus Aran as she attempts to retrieve a Metroid lava stolen by the space pirate leader Ridley. The gameplay focuses on exploration, with the player searching for power-ups that are used to reach previously inaccessible areas. At the time, many referred to this game as the best action-adventure game ever made, and to this day, the game is extremely atmospheric for a simple 16-bit system. Thought I'd leave Chrono Trigger until last on the list in an attempt to make crazy angry fanboys think I left it off. It's always good fun doing a bit of trolling. This game has crazy fanboys though for a reason, as this role-playing game is amongst the finest ever created. The game was promising from the get-go, with a team made up of the creators of Dragon Quest, Final Fantasy and Dragon Ball, all working together as one. This game, missing from all PAL territories, features some of the best RPG elements ever and mixes it up with time travel mechanics. The game features a fantastic yet not overly complex story, simple but innovative gameplay, and a full-time replay value through the application of multiple endings. Certainly a game for all Super Nintendo owners. So, that was 50 of my favourite Super Nintendo games of all time. I apologise if some of your favourites missed this list, but that's what I get for making a list of only 50 games for a system with one of the greatest libraries of all time. What top 50 lists would you like to see on this channel? Let me know in the comment section. Thank you for watching this marathon long video today. It was a lot of fun reflecting on some of my favourite games of all time. Shout outs to Jarrett Tolzian, Mad 8 Productions, Andreas Larson, Pizza Dawn, Mike Frost, Edward O'Reilly, Andrew Bazansky and all of my other patrons. Thank you all for your support. Yeah! If you want to be added to this prestigious list, then check out my Patreon page. Also, don't forget to subscribe, like and comment, and click one of the annotations at the end of this video to see what other stuff I've made. Ta-ta and farewell.